only 1 out of every 2,000 startups will successfully raise venture funding. This means that being a founder of a venture-funded startup puts you in one of the most exclusive clubs on earth. A club that only 0.05% of entrepreneurs are in. Now, for context, this means that getting VC funding is 78 times more difficult than getting into Stanford. Now, my company, Forecaster, has raised over $10 million in VC funding, and I've helped clients raise over $10 million over the past 10 years. Now, this puts me firmly in the top 1% of the top 1% of fundraisers, and I firmly believe that anybody can raise money. But why is getting funding so hard? Well, that's a complicated question with a complicated answer, but I generally believe that it boils down to not knowing how the game is played. People don't know what to expect when they hit the fundraising trail, and they burn through too many leads, tarnishing their reputation and their ability to raise, or they simply get frustrated and give up. So today I wanted to go over my ultimate startup fundraising guide. I'm going to cover what I believe are the 6 most important areas of fundraising. They are exploring your fundraising options, preparing your pitch, finding investors, leveraging your network and community, avoiding common fundraising mistakes, and the 5 essential resources for fundraising founders. So if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll show you where you can get all of the fundraising resources you need completely for free. Free, like $0. That's the best return on investment you're going to get from a YouTube video that you watch today. I can guarantee you that. But before we get into any of that, please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. So as entrepreneurs, it's our jobs to grow, learn, and get better. And that's what this channel is all about. And I'd love for you to follow along. So let's jump in. Let's start with exploring fundraising options. Now, before you start raising capital, you should evaluate all of your options. Now, I'm going to cover the 7 most common options. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list, but it provides a very quick overview of the most common fundraising strategies. I want to start with the top 3, which are going to be equity financing, convertible notes, and safes. So let's start with equity financing. Equity financing is raising capital by selling shares to investors. So shares represent ownership of your company. So equity financing does cause dilution of your ownership and your control. Equity financing requires a pre-money and a post-money valuation, due diligence, and a lot of paperwork. Now let's look at convertible notes. Convertible notes are a type of debt that converts into equity at a later date, oftentimes at the next financing round. Now, convertible notes offer more flexibility compared to equity financing. They are cheaper and easier to get done, so a lot of earlier companies tend to use them as their preferred source of financing. Now let's talk about safes, which are also known as a simple agreement for future equity. Now, safes are an alternative to convertible notes. As with convertible notes, you receive capital upfront in exchange for future equity triggered by an upcoming event. The difference here is that convertible notes are technically debt and safes are kind of a hybrid of debt and equity. It's kind of in its own financing category. So just like with convertible notes, safes are great for earlier stage companies. Outside of these 3, there are a few other funding options that I do want to touch on. Now, one is venture debt. Venture debt is a form of financing designed for venture-backed startups that may not have significant cash flow or assets to secure traditional loans from traditional banks. Venture debt is great for companies under the right circumstances, but you'll likely need significant revenue or funding in order to get them done. I usually only recommend venture debt to companies who can confidently outperform the interest rates that are tied to them, which can be significant. We're talking upper teens, lower 20s in most cases. We've also got extension rounds of financing. So if you've already received some funding and you need to extend your runway, but you're not ready to raise a full-on round, an extension might be a good fit for you. So extension can always be called seed prime, seed 2, seed to series A rounds, things like that. But basically, they're in between rounds that are in between larger financing rounds. You've also got equity crowdfunding. Now, equity crowdfunding is an alternative financing option that allows startups to raise capital from a broader range of investors, including non-accredited investors like loyal customers, social media followers, and other community members. Now, you can select a reliable platform like WeFunder, StartEngine, or Republic to do this. You set the minimum and maximum fundraising goals before you launch. The service is going to hold all of the payments in escrow. Now, if you meet the minimum fundraising goal, you get the money, and if not, investors get the money back. Equity crowdfunding is a great fit if your startup has a very loyal customer base or if you have a really big social media following. Otherwise, they can be somewhat tricky to pull off in my experience. Last but not least, you have grants. Now, grants can be great funding sources, but they are not easy to get. You can find grants through organizations like state and local governments, universities, and labs, and nonprofits. Now, if you can get them, they're great because there's no repayment and there's no dilution, which is like the best type of money to get outside of revenue. The challenge here is that there's a ton ton of competition, paperwork, and they can take a lot of time to get done. So those are the types of funding that you can expect. But now I want to get into preparing for your pitch. Now there are several things that you should put in place ahead of time before you start approaching investors. First and foremost, metrics matter. When you talk to investors, you need to be ready to speak their language, which is the language of numbers. Investors compare competing opportunities every day, and metrics and benchmarks can help you understand your performance and your growth potential, especially in relation to your peers. Your most important metrics depend on your business model and your industry, but you need to make sure that you know them. So we'll take a SaaS business for example. These are the 10 key metrics that every SaaS founder should know and understand before they go and fundraise. Monthly recurring revenue, or MRR. That's the amount of recurring revenue that your company receives every single month, as the name explains. Annual recurring revenue, or ARR. This is the annualized version of MRR, typically calculated just by MRR times 12. Easy enough. Gross margin indicates the sales that will exceed business costs, calculated as revenue minus cost of goods sold divided by revenue. ACV, or annual contract value. The average value of your contracts is particularly important for enterprise SaaS companies with custom contracts. LTV, or lifetime value, is the amount of money that you expect to get from an average customer throughout their entire life. Payback period is the break-even point for each customer, or the average time that it takes for a company to recover the cost that it took to get the customer in the first place, otherwise known as customer acquisition costs. Customer acquisition cost, or CAC, is the cost to acquire a customer, calculated by dividing the total marketing cost by the number of customers gained in that same period of time. Churn rate, the percentage of customers or subscribers who cancel or do not renew their subscriptions during a period calculated monthly or annually. Monthly active users, or MAUs, is the number of active users that you have on your platform every single month. Expansion MRR, this is the increase in monthly recurring revenue within your current users, typically consisting of users upgrading to higher tier subscription plans. Now you're going to need to figure out the metrics that matter the most for your particular business. The ones that we just talked about were for SaaS businesses, but if you're e-commerce, these are going to vary slightly, so do your homework, make sure that you know your numbers. All right, so now that we've covered metrics and types of funding, I want to talk about how we're going to find investors. One element of a successful fundraising campaign is a well-managed investor pipeline. No matter what you do, I don't want you to run out of leads while fundraising, so fill your pipeline with more investors than you think you're going to need in order to close your round. Now here's a simple 3-step process to build and optimize a pipeline that's going to connect you with the right investors. Step 1, locate investors. So search for investors through personal networks, industry events, or online platforms like AngelList, Crunchbase, and PitchBook. Now I want you to focus on the investors that are in your industry, your stage, and your deal size. These are people that would most likely be the type of person that could invest in your company. Step 2, document your pipeline. Now create a contact list, spreadsheet, or database as the foundation for your investor pipeline. I want you to include details like fund name, size, location, ticket size, domain, contact info, type of interest, intro status, if whether meeting is scheduled, just additional notes, anything that you think could be interesting and useful to track, I want you to include in your investor pipeline. Then I want you to rank investors based off of how they match up with your deal in terms of industry, sector, location, and deal size. Try to find at least 50 to 100 potential investors that meet this profile. The more, the better. Don't run out of leads. Step 3, I want you to put your pipeline to work. When you're ready to start raising capital, reach out to the highest ranked investors and best relationships. After first contact, maintain regular communication with every investor in your pipeline. Send monthly updates with accomplishments, milestones, KPIs, financial insights, things like that. I want you to focus on building rapport and instilling confidence in your ability as a leader. So stay engaged and keep the opportunity relevant and keep investors interested. Now I want to talk about how you can leverage your network and community during a fundraise. When raising capital for your startup, your network might be the best place for you to start. Even if you don't know that many wealthy people, talking to those that you know can open doors and expose possibilities that you might be overlooking. Directly asking for help is often the best way to open up a networking conversation like this. So let your connections know that you're working on a startup project and ask them if they would be willing to listen to you and give you their thoughts. When you ask people for advice, typically they'll lean in and try to help. That can mean making phone calls or introductions that open doors for you. Or worst case, it's another set of eyes on materials that give you a valuable opinion. I want to break this down into 4 different rules. Rule number 1, treat your contacts as mentors, not piggy banks. Seek out people with experience in your industry, working in companies relevant to your business. Don't treat every everyone as a source of funds, although some might be. Ask for guidance and advice. Rule number 2, set up mentorship sessions. If somebody has valuable advice and shows interest in your project, try to get another meeting. Show up with a list of questions and create an atmosphere of mentorship. The more invested you are, the more invested they will be. Rule number 3, stay grateful and connected. Show thanks to everyone who takes the time to listen. Reach out and let them know that you appreciated their time. Start sending out monthly email updates to let everybody know how things are shaping up. Stay top of mind in case a new opportunity arises. And rule number 4, don't burn bridges. Be gracious if you ask somebody for help and they decline. Try to maintain respect and trust throughout your network. People talk, and whenever a potential investor asks questions about you, you want that response to be positive. It all comes down to being open, friendly, and respectful. Just let people know that you want their help. You may find some surprising opportunities. Now I want to talk about how you can avoid some really common fundraising mistakes. Now, fundraising is a big deal for any founder. It's often the first time that you step out and put your ideas out into the open, where they're going to be scrutinized, nitpicked, and potentially shot down. You always want to be sure that you're putting the best foot forward. And if you screw up on something big, you'll likely lose the confidence of the investor that you're talking to. Now, here are 3 mistakes that you want to avoid while hitting the fundraising trail. Number 1, overstating your revenue forecast. Most founders are optimistic, and that's great. But whenever you're forecasting your revenue, it's also important to be realistic. With some outlandish numbers, you're going to lose the investor's interest immediately. From their vantage point, if you don't understand your revenue potential, then you don't understand much. Mistake number 2, raising too little capital. Set your capital requirements strategically. Calculate how much cash you need to make it to the next round and mitigate the risk of running out by including a buffer. You can always ask for an extension, but you might avoid that stress by adding a 20% buffer to account for unforeseen challenges and opportunities that just happen whenever you're running a startup. Mistake number 3, and this is probably the biggest one, which is starting too late. Now, if you have less than 6 months of runway, you should probably be raising capital right now. Raising capital takes between 4 and 8 months and sometimes longer. So to avoid a cash crunch, start the process at least 8 months before you expect to run out of funds. You can also lose leverage in the negotiation process if you're in the middle of a cash emergency. Be aware of these common mistakes and be proactive about sidestepping them. You can be better prepared, and you're going to be more likely to unlock that funding. Lastly, here are the 5 essential resources for fundraising founders. I'll preface this by saying that whenever you're fundraising, you have to let people help you. Whether it's just listening to a mentor's feedback or paying for professional guidance, the job probably exceeds your bandwidth or expertise. So it's important for you to get the help that you need. If you're not a pitch deck expert, get some opinions from investors, designers, and other founders. If you've never built a financial model, make sure that you work with somebody that has experience that reviews your model before you share it. You might need some help to build them, but here are the 5 resources that you should put in place before you start hitting the fundraising trail. Number 1, pitch deck. Obviously, a pitch deck is the one thing that every founder knows that they need. We're including it on this list so that you can see that it's not the only thing. Your pitch deck is your first impression, so it is critical. Make sure yours tells a compelling narrative and make sure that it hits. Number 2, your financial model. Your pitch deck tells the story. Your financial model shows how you're going to make it a reality. Finance is the investor's native language, and your model gives them a numerical narrative. It's a framework that they can understand, which empowers them to make informed decisions. Number 3, a data room. A centralized data room has 2 huge benefits. First, it establishes transparency, which is really important to investors. And second, it saves you time. Handle questions and requests effectively and focus more time on the strategy and execution. Every time you answer a question or concern, put that information in the supporting materials in your data room so that investors can find answers without your help. Number 4, the investor pipeline. You use a CRM to manage sales and marketing, use accounting software to manage finances. Why wouldn't you have a designated tool to manage investors whenever you're raising capital? Use an investor pipeline to organize investors' contact info, notes, and your next steps with each of them. Include some metadata like their preferred check size, industry, and concentrations, and prioritize them based off of how closely you feel that they match your opportunity. And number 5 is confidence. Now, is confidence a resource? Yes, it is. It is something that you can influence that provides an advantage over your competition. The best way to show it is to deeply understand your financial metrics, industry landscape, and your go-to-market plan. Whether you're a charismatic visionary or an introspective code jockey, if you roll up your sleeves and work to develop develop this plan well, you will become confident about them talking to investors. Use these resources to attract good investors and maximize every single opportunity. And finally, I promised you free resources at the end of this video, and I am a man of my word. So go to forecaster.co/startup-resources to download all 4 of these fundraising resources completely for free. And if you're feeling completely lost, this is a great way to start with no money down. So there you have it. There's my deep dive into all things fundraising. But let me know if you think I missed anything by leaving a comment below. And if you thought this was useful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification. Education is the best way to stay informed and ahead of the competition. And as founders, it's our jobs to keep ourselves educated and informed at all times. And of course, if you want to learn more and continue to grow as an entrepreneur, be sure to check out the other videos on my channel. We put out videos every single week. Until then, keep building. We'll talk soon.